Thank you, and thank you very much, Treasurer, indeed. I'll welcome the panel up to the stage. We have Peter Achterstraat, the New South Wales Productivity Commissioner, Princess Ventura, the Regional Director of Urbis, Tom Mackellar, the Group Head of Development and Managing Director of Development Australia for Lendlease. I'll host the panel and we'll have a bit of a chat. Thank you, Treasurer. Look, I might just before you asked a little bit on one thing I'll specifically address before we go to the panel, and I will actually ask the first questions of our panellists so that you've got an opportunity for a bit of a break and to catch your breath. I'm sure you'll all agree that the Treasurer is an outstanding intellect. He just covered a whole breadth of subjects that impact upon our industry and upon our work in a way that wasn't just superficial. It showed an in-depth knowledge, a knowledge of the issues, a knowledge of the matters that are confronting us, a knowledge of the taxation matters, a knowledge of the importance of infrastructure and the effectiveness or the importance of delivering infrastructure to support housing supply. Acknowledge the opportunity that comes forward with the rejigging of the way the Commonwealth have done their National Housing Accord funding arrangements that could assist us in delivering that. But the other thing you raised was the 30% affordable housing bonus and the issue. The main issue there, Treasurer, if I may, is the question of it being on top of what's already required within existing LEPs. So if you're requiring 15% affordable housing for the purposes of a 30% bonus, tremendous, wonderful initiative. Why not apply that equally across the whole of Greater Sydney, rather than as it is now, on top of existing affordable housing provisions which have failed to deliver for the last 10 years and not delivered affordable housing at all. I think 37 houses in Waverley Council, for example, less than 20 over in Willoughby. It's ridiculously low. By making it in addition to those provisions that have already failed, you're essentially saying 10% affordable housing under the existing provisions plus another 15 is suddenly unfeasible. The only place it becomes feasible is the west of Sydney. And so ironically, your affordable housing policy is not bringing affordable housing to the east, it's actually pushing affordable housing to the west. And so I would say don't double stack it. Make it consistent for everyone, and in the same way as you had for the sustainability SEP, where you said anything inconsistent with the sustainability SEP is now overridden by these new provisions, you simply put the same clause into the affordable housing SEP, and suddenly it can open doors that otherwise we fear might not be able to be opened for the purposes of housing supply generally and affordable housing. So I leave you with that. We've done about 19 different recommendations in relation to that, but that's all gone to the Minister for Planning and I won't burden you with those, but I think that that's the most important thing. The non-double stack is what will make it practical. To the panel discussion. I'd like to ask Tom Mackellar first and then perhaps for Princess to comment on this. Where do you see the biggest opportunities in supporting the much-needed housing supply of diverse housing solutions? Because it's not just about one sort of type of housing. We need to continue to provide a diversity of housing type. And given the ambitious targets that have been signed up to, where would you be starting, Tom?
Thank you, Tom. I think, first of all, I'd sort of thank the Treasurer for his comments, and I think a number of the things the government is talking about we're highly supportive of. But I think the frustration would be really the need for speed, and we're going too slowly. I think the real opportunity does lie in, we've talked about affordable housing targets, and I think that's starting to generate really good conversations, and we need to continue those conversations. The diversity of housing is very important, and I think encouraging sectors like build to rent, affordable housing, social housing is very important alongside traditional housing. But really the elephant in the room for us is planning. When we look across the eastern seaboard, if we want to get a planning approval in Brisbane, it's 6 months, in Melbourne it's 12 months, in New South Wales it's 3 years. 3 years is a very long time. I don't need to sort of give this room a sort of lecture on the time value of money, but it makes development very expensive and very difficult, and it is compounding the affordability crisis. It is very hard to make projects viable when you have to have 3 years sitting in a planning process.
I think, is that on?
Yep.
Okay, it's just very soft. I think there's plenty of opportunities in terms of where we can have more housing diversity. There are many assets, there are many land holdings that are close to amenities and economic opportunities that could really unleash housing with the right incentives in place. Those could include our shopping centers, for example, that are near train stations usually. The council-owned lands that you see around town centers are car parks. If you see a car park in a town center, chances are they're council-owned land. There are golf clubs. We have far too many golf clubs here in New South Wales, for example. I'm not suggesting that we convert the entire golf course into housing, but certainly there is room for more mixed-use development in that could actually improve the financial viability of our golf clubs, for example, as well as, of course, the transport-oriented developments. There are too many assets that are close to amenities and economic opportunities across New South Wales that are really, really underutilized, including even, the last one that I'd say is a pet hate of mine, how many used car showrooms do we really need across Sydney?
So that's the sort of opportunities for some positive. I'm going to ask Tom and Princess again a question. We often hear horror stories about New South Wales being the worst in terms of planning performance in the country. Is it really that bad, or are we just beating our own drum? Tom?
Short answer, yes. Longer answer is, I think the process that we have in New South Wales for design excellence is really suffocating the system. It's become a sequential process where essentially you need to go through every step of the process one after another, which is compounding the time frame. And I think the opportunity is to still have design excellence, but look at how we do various steps in parallel, which would free up much needed time. So the short answer, yes, and the longer answer is I think there's solutions in there that are within the government's power that they can unleash.
Princess?
In terms of transparency and expediency, we certainly are, without a doubt, the worst planning system in the country, if not the world, I would say. And that's evidence-based, right? I'm an economist. We've looked at this and we've looked at evidence comparing, every other year we're asked by an industry body to do this work. If you Google, you'll find it because it's in the public domain. We did it for the residential sector, we've done it for retirement living, we've done it for industrial. Now we're being asked again to look again retirement living to see whether we have gotten worse. We certainly haven't gotten better. And time again, whether it's in expediency, transparency, and predictability, we are always last in that round. But saying something positive, because I don't want to be negative the entire time, is when it comes to strategic planning and setting the standards at a statewide level, that absolutely we do rank better than our other neighbours.
Tom, can I just add something to that?
Peter Achterstraat.
In relation to figures, etc., the Productivity Commission did some work and on a particular type of application, and this is a specific one, not general, it would take 200 days in New South Wales to get the approval. In Victoria, it was taking 110, and in Queensland, 98 days. So there is evidence to suggest that there's a great deal of room for improvement.
And that's a good segue.
The only other thing, if I can add, Tom, in terms of outcomes, I'll keep it brief. When you look at a benchmark on floor space per capita, regardless of what the land use is, whether it be retail, commercial, industrial, and you look at that relative to our population, we are really seriously underdone. So the retail per capita provision, for example, in New South Wales, is far, far lower than other states. You look at industrial, it's the same story as well.
Having Peter Achterstraat jump in there is timely because I wanted to say just a couple of things about the Productivity Commission and Peter himself. Peter was the first actually under the former Treasurer Dominic Perrottet, so that's a long time ago, to start the discussion about productivity and to really shine a spotlight on the planning system as an inhibitor to productivity. In fact, the very document that you're referring to in that case study that you alluded to just now is something that we GIPPed. And as a result of that GIPPA, from a study that was done by Mookhey, I think it was, we found that New South Wales had the poorest record in terms of the assessment of applications, not only in every state generally, but in every single housing category, from a pergola all the way through to a multi-storey mixed-use development, in every single category. And sometimes it ranked not just we were 100% worse, as was the case that you just said, but sometimes up to 350% worse. So that started it on this discussion. Peter and his work in the Productivity Commission were the first to raise the story. He's also more recently turned his head to building more homes where people want to live. Who knew? But apparently it's the places where people want to live, where the prices have gone up way more than the average, which says to you that there's not enough supply in those locations. It says that there's a lot of people who want to live there and there aren't enough homes to live there. It just so happens that they're also the areas which most oppose housing development. Peter's contribution and the Productivity Commission's contribution to that endeavour, while we don't always agree with everything that's implemented as a result of his inquiries, and I'm referring to the infrastructure contributions piece there, we don't agree with everything. We appreciate the rigour that he brings to the table. So I just wanted to put that on the record. Peter, you've also talked about, and I'll throw this one to the Treasurer after you speak now. You've also talked about the cost of infrastructure and the fact that if you build more in the east, where people want to live, as it happens, if you build more in the east, you'll actually save the state government money to the tune of about $75,000 per dwelling in terms of utilising existing infrastructure or augmenting that infrastructure rather than building entirely new infrastructure. What does that mean, though, for greenfield development, I would say? And how does that impact then on the government's attitude towards a housing mix going forward?
Thanks, Tom. Look, it's not either greenfield or infield, it's both. I mean, and in the past, only less than 20% of new homes have been built within 10 kilometres of the centre of the city. What we're suggesting is that maybe there should be more of a rebalancing between the greenfield and the infield. When we talked, the Treasurer mentioned housing is important for the quality of life. I mean, that's the bottom line where we're coming from. And if we want to change the perceptions in the community, I could easily come out and say, look, if every apartment block that was built in the last 5 years was 3 stories higher, that would be 45,000 extra homes. I could say that to the world, right? But I'd be shouted down. And people would say, oh, we don't want it now, we don't want that, we don't want that, right? So what we've done in the Productivity Commission is narrative. We've tried to define the problem and said, look, if nothing's done, we've got a shortfall of 100,000 homes at the moment, and we need another 500,000 in the next 17 years. We've got to do something. And I think to a certain extent, Tom, the narrative has changed from NIMBY to Bisbee. Right, so in the past people have said not in my backyard, but I think the Bisbees are coming in where they're acknowledging, and Bisbees of course are built it in someone else's backyard, right? So they still know that something has to be done, but whereas they're not saying that nothing should be done. So I think the narrative and the community perceptions are moving. And when you talked about our 2 reports, one indicated that where there's already existing infrastructure, you take along the T4 train line, right? It's one of the train lines which is not overused, it's not overcrowded. In that area, it's much more inexpensive for that. There's a number of them have got vacancies in the schools area. There's water that can be connected at minimal choice, and there's open spaces. So in those situations, there's not a lot of expenditure for a government if there's new development. Whereas in Baulkham Hills and other places, where the water connections are going to cost a lot of money, where the schools are almost full, and the congestion to come in is quite prohibitive. So we have allocated or done analysis to show where it would be cheaper for the government to build. Now, that doesn't mean you should build it just because it's cheaper for the government. We've also done analysis to say where do people want to live. And our analysis is all based around, the economists in the room will know marginal cost and marginal revenue. So it's the places where people are prepared to pay a lot more for the last unit than it costs to build it, right? So arguably, if something costs $600,000 the last unit to buy, in some parts of Sydney, people are only prepared to pay $601,000, right? But there's other areas where they'll pay $900,000. So we're suggesting those areas with excess demand is where we should be building more, and that will put downward pressure on the prices.
Treasurer. It'll be turned up as you speak.
Well, firstly, I feel like the panel should tell me what you really think. Don't be shy. Secondly, your point about New South Wales having the worst planning system in the country is not contested by this government. It's the second point I'd make. The third point I make is that I too welcome the leadership role of the Productivity Commissioner under the previous government and under this government in identifying the challenges that the state is facing. And the fourth point, which I guess is a substantial point, is that we do recognise the fact that you can't continue to add a street to the urban fringes of Sydney, Newcastle, Wollongong, Warren, time and time again, because it does cost more. And right now, lots of people are complaining about the cost of living because a lot of the infrastructure that has been required to be built, be it electricity or water or gas, is now being cost recovered from people as well. And so I am live to these forces. I am live to the fact that there's conversations being had right now about how to do water charging, and I know equally that the Urban Taskforce has strong views on it. But you'll see this government, as we said we would do, look to rebalance the housing supply targets so it's clear that every community is doing its bit to make sure that our children and our grandchildren have a place to live. And I know the Planning Minister, and I know that is leading a lot of that work, and we do look forward to having more to say before the end of the year about actions we're taking as a new government to point the way to a different direction.
So I want to raise a question for you, and it relates kind of partly to the Treasurer, to the planning system, but it also relates to the Valuer General. And that is in the question of the application of land tax. You'll be familiar that land tax is paid on the basis of the highest and best use of the land as it's zoned. We have a situation where massive swathes of Western Sydney have been rezoned, but massive swathes have been rezoned without supporting infrastructure. So we're waiting on the roads, we're waiting on the metro station, we're waiting on the water connections, we're waiting on the sewage systems, and yet the land's been rezoned. So the land tax take is based on the highest and best use as per the zoning. So you've got a whole stack of land where people in this room are paying a higher level of land tax because of the zoning, which allows for a highest and best use, which is absolutely unrealisable. Yeah. It almost, to my mind, is theft, not by you, but by the system and indeed by the former government. Because it used to be that you wouldn't do a rezoning basically until you had a plan and you could say, we're going to rezone it now, applications will come in, the infrastructure's planned, it's going to be delivered, and bang, you'll be able to realise the expectation. But by doing such a massive swathe in one go out there in Western Sydney without that infrastructure support, all it's done is create a burden for us, which ironically is making development unfeasible.
So again, don't be shy. Let me know what you think. I feel like I'm getting the audiobook narration of Tom's emails. A couple of things I'll say about it. Firstly, in 22, land values across New South Wales went up 22% in the third year of the three-year average. I would dispute whether or not that was 100% attributable to zoning reform. I think it's more likely it was attributable to the fact that there was a period of quantitative easing and a lot of investment that pumped up land values across the board, which accounts for most of the reasons why that value went up. But your point about the fact that those who pay land tax are now paying more land tax and can't get access to the income that otherwise is meant to support the capacity to pay is well taken. I will point out the Valuer General is an independent office. I will point out that the previous Valuer General, perhaps I played was played quite a lot of role in opposition, scrutinising the workings of that office and the role that they played. And I would also point out the fact that there's been a new Valuer-General that's been appointed. And I hear the feedback loud and clear, and I will put it on my list of questions to ask.
And I want to be clear, it's not necessarily the Valuer-General's fault. The Valuer-General just does what they're required to do under the Act. The fault is the people who rezone the land without any expectation that the infrastructure would be brought along. So the idea that a government might actually do rezonings in conjunction with infrastructure delivery seems to me something that has been lost to government over time, perhaps 10 years or so, and something that needs to be brought back.
Yes, I hear you. And look, I figured you weren't arguing for us to stop rezoning. I took that on, that you were wanting us to make sure that the rezoning is taking place with the infrastructure.
Correct.
So I picked the point up. I got the nuance.
Told you he was bright. So, Tom Mackellar, I wonder if you can reflect upon, from an international perspective, we talk a lot about affordable housing. Are there areas, and you and I have had sometimes earnest discussions about whether or not inclusionary affordable zoning is possible in the Australian context. Obviously, given now, as the Treasurer pointed out in his speech, the cost of an average mortgage as a proportion of average income has never been so high, or the multiples of your average income to go to a mortgage has never been so high. Given that there's obviously a need to start to look at more at affordable housing options, but at the same time, if you're taxing existing housing supply in order to pay for that, it effectively makes all housing more affordable and potentially unavailable, therefore exacerbating the shortage in the supply. How have other countries and other jurisdictions dealt with that?
Yeah, so I think if we look to our international friends, if you look in cities like London, the standard policy now within London is on government land, it's 50% affordable housing, social and affordable housing is the standard. And on all other land, it's up to 30%. So they do have an element of inclusionary zoning, if you can call it that, within their city. We see in other jurisdictions developer bonuses for social and affordable housing to incentivise the private sector to deliver housing. So I think, and then we have in other countries minimums of sort of 15 to 20% is quite standard for new development. So I think, we've sort of quite publicly said this, we think the government has at its disposal on its sites, particularly those that are close to transport hubs, the ability to provide significant levels of affordable housing and set minimum requirements for that. And the government's already, I think, come out and supported that as a way to provide that housing. The key is we're late to this party. Other cities are well ahead of us in terms of ingraining this in the property development system, and we're playing catch up, and we're probably a decade behind where we need to be, and we're a decade behind where we need to be in a market where everything is really unaffordable already. So we don't have the magic answer, except, as the Treasurer said, supply is the key. That will be the thing that fixes it. But we need to get on and really look at those opportunities where governments do control land and get them to release those sites as quickly as possible, streamline the planning system, and absolutely set minimum requirements for affordable housing on those sites that governments are releasing.
I just thought I'd give you a break from my audiobook, Daniel. Back to that, though. Water charges, DSP water charges. It's something that Rose Jackson is hit with the burden with having being responsible for. The impact of the water charges it really comes on to Paul Scully and Rose Jackson as the Minister for Housing and Homelessness, respectively, and the Minister for Planning trying to set the Premier's housing targets. The Minister responsible for IPART, who determine these things or review these things, and is the Premier, and the ministers responsible for the day-to-day operations of Sydney Water are the shareholder ministers, which are yourself and Courtney Hughes. I guess at the end of the day, though, an increase in DSP water charges, and sometimes not in small number, but $40,000, $50,000 in areas that have been long planned for urban growth, with lots of plans gone in, lots of published documentation, major encouragement of people in this room putting their hands in their pockets and investing in those communities, to suddenly be hit with an additional $50,000, $60,000 per lot, $47,000 on average in southwestern Sydney. That's a lot. I guess it's something that we say, well, we understand that you've got to provide the water infrastructure resources, and we understand that you're constrained as a government budget. Could some consideration be given to sharing that burden between all of the payers of rates in Sydney Water? It'd be a minor inflationary impact, but it'd be recognising that everyone benefits from economic growth, including the Treasury and the revenue that comes in, rather than putting all the money on the marginal consumer, making those arguably least able to pay, burdening them with an additional $50,000, because developers don't have the margins now to be able to just absorb it. They certainly don't with the numbers that you quoted of building companies going broke. So it has to be passed on. The necessary impact of that will actually be lesser number of housing supply. So that's a concern that we've raised. Is there anything that we can look forward to in that space, or is it just let's get through to the next year and see if we can do better then?
No, firstly, I don't know why you're so bleak in your and pessimistic, Tom. But secondly, we all truly appreciate the fact that when we came to office, I spent quite a lot of time, actually, and I'm still spending a lot of time deep diving many of the issues which you're talking about. You're talking about one of the components which is affecting your industry, but there are other parts about the previous government's water infrastructure agenda that we're also looking into. And equally, I just want to first make the very first point. It's not like this is not getting the attention of government. Secondly, you're right to point out that I and Minister Hussos are the two shareholders of Sydney Water. We do take that responsibility very seriously, and it's one of the 8 state-owned corporations for which I'm a shareholder. And I can tell you we are spending a lot of time looking through, step by step, what is the long-term capital plan that's being proposed by Sydney Water. One of the factors that have driven it, is it still relevant if we find ourselves resetting our housing targets and where the infrastructure, the housing is going? And are we making sure that we're aligning the water infrastructure plan to where the housing is going? And to some degree, a lot of that work will intensify after the housing supply targets are finalised and released. And then the next component, which is where I'm likely to play a bigger role, is even if you accept that that is the new strategy, what is the right funding strategy that sits behind it? And what, therefore, am I prepared to do with Sydney Water to allow them to do that? So we are working through the issues pretty systematically. And there are times and places in which interventions and adjustments to government by a new government to a previous policy are welcome. I'm confident that the work is being done rigorously to allow the government to be making some good decisions about this in the near future.
Look, I've promised the Minister's Chief of Staff, he's already standing at the back. Michael Buckland's his name, that guy there, Minister's Chief of Staff. I promised him that I would wind the session up early as the Minister is sitting there sweating with a fever. I want to take the opportunity to offer my sincere thanks and gratitude of the industry, of the property development sector and industry, not only for the fact that you're here today, and that's greatly appreciated, but also for the fact that you demonstrated very clearly today that you have a great knowledge of the issues that are of concern to us. You are concerned for the fees, taxes and charges that impact upon us. You are concerned for the importance of delivery of housing supply for your own revenues, as well as for the people of New South Wales and for the cost of living that delivers. You've shown a breadth of knowledge, a generosity in your answers. You've even shown that you read some of my missives on Friday afternoon. But before I close, I've been reflecting upon the evolution of humanity. And I think it comes from Peter Achterstraat and something that he mentioned. Just look out for our weekly newsletters for images of NIMBYs evolving to BIMBYs and then ultimately to YIMBYs. Ladies and gentlemen, put your hands together for our panellists. Thank you very much indeed.